we're targeting co-regulation, we're targeting self-regulation, we're targeting emotional needs, we're targeting sensory differences, we're targeting self-advocacy, really building it from a foundation where the parents are like, oh, so this is what's working. Here's what I'd like to prioritize. These are the things that I think would work best.
Chris Wenger, better known as Speech Dude, has a way of making people stop scrolling and start thinking differently about how we support neurodivergent learners. What does it look like to move away from compliance-based strategies? And how do we set goals for social learning that support authenticity, not masking? Chris is a high school speech-language pathologist with a talent for making big ideas about neurodivergent support both practical and relatable. He's here today to answer some questions about how he supports his neurodivergent students. That's straight ahead on episode 269. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity? You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity Podcast.
One of the things we talk about in today's conversation is how powerful it is when neurodivergent students feel a true sense of belonging. And honestly, that's something that therapists need too. That's a big part of why we created the Therapist Hub at Neurodiversity University. It's a space for mental health professionals and other professionals supporting neurodivergent people who are committed to neurodiversity affirming work and who want a community that actually really gets it. The doors are open right now, but they'll close at the end of this week. So if you want to be part of this community where you can learn best practices on how to support your neurodivergent clients and earn live CE credits to maintain your license, head on over to neurodiversity.university and click on the tab for the Therapist Hub. Of course, we'll put a link in the show notes too. Chris Wenger is next.
Previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
You know, when I was a kid, oftentimes you didn't find what you were really good at until you were like 14, 15, 16, even older. But now we expect kids to find that area of excellence when they're really quite young. And the way they tell us that they're not ready for that is by looking like they're unmotivated and unwilling to try new things because they're afraid they're not going to be successful in them. And we tend to want to love the kid who we want that kid to be, as opposed to the kid who was right in front of us telling us what they already love to do.
That's episode 171. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Our guest today is Chris Wenger, also known as Speech Dude. Chris is a neurodivergent high school speech-language pathologist, an international speaker, and the creator of the Dynamic Assessment of Social-Emotional Learning, a strengths-based assessment designed for autistic students. He's also the founder of NeuroAffirm, a groundbreaking global directory that connects neurodivergent individuals and their families with affirming providers. Chris's work focuses on making neuroaffirming practices more accessible and empowering educators, therapists, and families to better support neurodivergent learners. Chris, thanks for this conversation.
Emily, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. You probably don't know this, but I've been a big fan of yours for several years now.
Same here. I've been keeping tabs on your work and love what you're doing. And I can't believe we haven't spoken yet.
This is fantastic.
Absolutely.
And it's nice because we'll both have that foundation and we align with the same perspectives and values and ways that we want to push forward to best help our neurodivergent kids. So this is going to be a great discussion.
I want to start out by talking about the foundational piece of what we're all working toward to be more neurodiversity affirming. And one of the things you talk about is moving away from compliance-based strategies, things like sticker charts, token systems, and behavior points. And on paper, that all makes perfect sense. But in practice, it's harder to make that adjustment, especially when they're so baked into our school culture. And a good example would be like, let's say a student has an accommodation that allows them to take breaks, but they're then required to earn that break in some way.
Right.
Obviously, we can all understand the intention, but it's sort of like saying you can have the break, but only if you don't really need it. So I want to talk about how we can move away from those compliance-based structures, because if we don't support a student when they're masking or simply running on empty, how will we help them reach their goals in the first place?
Right. Yeah. I think you hit it right several times right there with this idea that we start with control, which basically is compliance, right? And that doesn't work. Sit still, keep your hands in your lap, make eye contact, all of this compliance-based, or, it's like, we want you to read a paragraph and then you'll earn your ability to get your reading glasses. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
Tie in the accommodations and the supports and create an environment where the kids feel safe and regulated, build on autonomy, and then that's where we'll see the true growth. So I think that's the start of it right there. When we talk about making the shift, the kids can't learn if they don't feel safe. And I know you had a guest several episodes back, Robin Goebel, and that idea that if we're not feeling safe and regulated, and it's that Mona de la Hook concept in her books, where the reality is, and I don't mean the kind of safety where you're sitting in class and you don't feel safe if there's a bear next to you. It's not like that kind of safety I'm talking about. I'm talking about the safety where the kids can feel connection and they can feel safe in a way where they can be themselves. It's funny because I think about something that happened recently here in California, where I'm located. There was an earthquake and it was in the San Diego area, and it reached up to my high school setting. And the thing that people don't realize that's very alarming is when that happens, and it happened during second period earlier in the day, everyone's cell phone goes off. It sends the beep like, burp, burp, and it says earthquake. So we were all in this like nervous system response. During that moment, you don't want to say, all right, class, right now we're going to take a test and I want you to put on your thinking caps. Here we go. So you have to feel safe. You have to feel regulated. You have to feel connected, and then you can build the foundation. So the way we do that is by shaping an IEP with language that works for everyone, that's easily digestible, where the teacher can also benefit from that. And then using things like declarative language coming from how do we prevent our students from feeling overwhelmed? How do we prevent them from getting to a point where they're like a volcano and exploding or reaching burnout? So yeah, I mean, shifting away from all that compliance into a model that supports regulation, that supports authenticity, that supports autonomy. I think that's how we grow. I was thinking about how that would work in the setting for a teacher and how much more effective all of this would be with that discussion that we use for what works for our students also works for teachers. So let me give you an example. At Whole Foods, when they hire employees, they don't just have the higher up manager. They get input from everybody that's on the working force, and they get to have input on who they want to work with. And I think that would be a fantastic way of getting some autonomy for departments on our campus, of an ability to put in some say on who we want as a leader on campus. My district actually did that. So our superintendent, we were looking for a new principal, and he sent out a Google form to the staff and said, what are you looking for in a principal? What are the values? What are the things that you like? What are the things that you're trying to get away from? And then there were several options of people that the staff had some input in. That's autonomy. That's giving some choice on who you work with.
I think you're right, though. I think adults need that as well as our kids.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the things that work best for us are the same things that work best for our kids. And I think that anytime you come in with like control, set way of doing it never isn't an effective approach.
Yeah. We talk about really wanting kids to be able to self-advocate, to have this authentic social connection. But ultimately, if we don't move away from some of these compliance-based frameworks, what ends up happening is from a very young age, kids learn to mask and hide all of these different pieces of themselves, sometimes not even really understanding why they're doing it. They just know, this is what I've been told, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what I should do. it's just a really difficult thing for them to then break out of, because when we then want them to work towards whatever these other goals are, it's almost impossible for them to meet those expectations because they're carrying around all this other stuff that they've built up over the years.
Yeah, I mean, we really have to come in from that angle and understand that, especially with my high school students, the dynamic changes a lot because now you have a larger campus, you have middle schools that are merged into one larger campus. You have teens that are starting to identify themselves in different groups, more pressure to be in groups in class. Your science teacher, your math teacher are now saying, all right, everybody, find a group. We're going to do a project. And all of that stress just it continues to escalate. After years of that nervous system accumulation of trying to do these things and perform, high school is extremely important to identify students if they're starting to reach the brink of burnout, or they're starting to get to a point where they've masked so much that the mask is so heavy that they don't want to go to school anymore, or everything just becomes so much more challenging. So identifying those things and creating environments, that's what I try to do too. And I know we'll jump into those topics, but like knowing these types of things and how can I create a safe environment for social groups where students can feel connected, they can feel a sense of belonging, not a sense of fitting in, but that solid foundation of belonging, and finding, honestly, it doesn't even have to be a big, large social connection of people, just one other person that they connect with, that they feel comfortable with, sitting down at lunch with. And they don't even have to have conversation, but we just build an environment where they could dive into their passions and special interests, because that there is a self-care.
I love that you mentioned fitting in versus belonging. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh my gosh. You know what? It's funny because we hear that quote. I've heard it my whole life, growing up ADHD, being the one that was bouncing off walls and getting sent to the office all the time. It's like you hear that thing where, the quote of fake it till you make it.
Yep.
You're like, all right, I'm going to fake it till I make it. And then you keep faking it until you can no longer make it, and you're burnt out and you can't do anything. And you no longer have your executive functioning skills, where everything starts to pile up and you've just hit this wall and you're burnt out. And you're like, well, I guess faking it till I make it isn't really working, because I have to hide who I am. Mm-hmm. I have to fake every situation that isn't who I am. And that doesn't work. That's not sustainable. Specifically, I'll be specific here too. That's not sustainable for our neurodivergent ADHD autistic kids, because once you try to come out of burnout, if you try to get right back into the fake it till you make it, it just creates this vicious loop of so many more difficulties with health and with other areas. So the sense of belonging is finding people where you feel heard, where you feel understood, where it's your tribe. And that's the key. Because fitting in is just trying to fake who you are so you don't feel rejected. Belonging is people are actively looking for you and saying, hey, I want you in my group. We have high school graduation coming up, and I have a pretty large caseload now. I have, I'd have to say about 15 of my students that are autistic are graduating. And so I've created a situation between lunches where we are talking about the grad night, which is they go to an event after they graduate with the whole school. There's like 12 buses that are going. But I called them all in, separate from what their little 3 or 4 group peers are. I brought them all in, no pressure to speak or anything, but I said, hey, all of you have one thing in common, which is you're all going to grad night. And I want to talk about, where should we start? Where are we going to go? And then over the past few weeks, we've built up that connection. So they now actively find each other and they are talking about grad night. They've exchanged numbers. They have a sense of belonging, and they're going to be cruising Universal Studios Hollywood with a group. And that's what it's all about. It's like, now, not only is this going to help with that sense of belonging and connection and being on the same bus and being with a crew at Universal Studios, but they're already talking about, what's our next thing after Universal Studios? We got to get our families to help us connect and go to Dave & Buster's. And That's it right there. That's how you create a harmonious life. Got to have somebody to connect with.
I love that. And actually that kind of leads into redefining social goals that we talk about, because so many social goals are exactly what you were talking about. Teaching kids to mask, teaching them to fit in, to change themselves, to fit into whatever structure is already there, as opposed to feeling like they can belong when they're being authentic. And, having that opportunity to just be a lot more human, not feeling like there's so much effort that goes into it to be someone who you're not. How do you kind of approach setting goals for social learning that don't just push kids to perform? I mean, you were talking about this opportunity to create this community. What about from that proactive piece where you're setting the goals for that social learning, looking forward to how you're going to support students?
It's exactly what you mentioned, social connection. So we shift from a masking goal to a connection goal. And just the language right there helps guide. So we think about, well, how can we create connection and what's healthy and what's enjoyable for the students? And that all ties into special interests. So I could create an IEP goal that might say, when provided opportunities for student to dive into their special interest, they'll create authentic and organic conversations by sharing details about their special interest. And when creating a safe environment where the student feels regulated, student will connect or bond with a peer over similar interest, over special interest. So we're really tying that piece in, because nobody wants to just randomly talk about the things that they don't enjoy. So that's kind of what the goal would look like from that end of things, is all about just reframing it. How do we build that connection? Some of the therapy activities I do is I'll do that strewing concept where you'll have a variety of activities and things that the students might gravitate towards naturally, rather than me having like a set plan or an activity that's like, here's what we're going to do today, guys. But I just keep it open and create situations that when they're having fun, I'm having fun. So I have a Nintendo Wii. Sometimes I'll have Mario Kart just laying out. I'll have different types of puzzles. I'll have activities to where maybe I'll have the screen up with a new movie that I was able to get on Amazon Prime. And they like that, it's like, oh, I didn't know that Moana 2 was out. Let's watch that for a little bit, or whatever it might be. They just naturally gravitate towards it. And for the kids who in the IEPs historically have been labeled as selectively mute, or, which is, we talk about situational mutism, or kids who are quiet or shy. It's funny because when you create opportunities and you create an environment where they can connect with like-minded individuals, you don't see that. It's like, no, like they're like full on having a conversation and diving into their interest. And there it is. We plant the seeds for growth. We create that environment.
Yeah.
There's other things too. I know on your shows, you've talked about the double empathy problem. I really create other goals beyond just the social connection with working on perspectives, but without sacrificing autonomy.
Yes.
Like a big one right now is, well, that's happened recently, is prom. And this happens year after year, where a student will come to me and say, I asked another girl out to prom and her number, and it just didn't work out. And then I follow up with, well, how well do you know her? Or is she a classmate? No, I've just seen her at lunch with her friends. I'm okay. So let's just talk about and walk through this so we can kind of build some perspective with sometimes how neurotypical interactions might work. And then I never tell them what to do or what not to do. It's just, here's some information. Come up with the way that works best for you. And that's a really huge piece of it.
When I work with educators, I feel like as far as masking goes, it's an interesting conversation because neurodivergent or not, we all do adjust the way we present in certain situations for various reasons. And I think to some extent that's okay. I feel like with neurodivergent kids, so often we forget the piece about offering them that autonomy to weigh out the benefits versus the drawbacks. How much energy is it going to take for you to go into this environment and make eye contact or hold your hand still so you're not stimming, because people might think of that, versus just being able to self-advocate or just being able to show up authentically and go, it's much easier for me to listen to you when I'm looking at the floor rather than at your face. And finding that opportunity for kids to recognize that about themselves, to be able to advocate is just a really great way, I think, to empower them.
Yeah, absolutely. The difference between masking with choice versus masking for safety or masking your core identity is a good discussion. I always think to the topic of a gift around the holidays where you get a sweatshirt that you didn't want from your mom and you're like, I love it. So you have choice. That's autonomy, where you're like, you know what? I want to protect mom's feelings. I just want to tell her, hey, you know what? I like this sweatshirt. Versus the 24/7 constantly having to hide your core identity self, to where eventually it catches up and you end up in burnout, and it leads to autoimmune, it leads to chronic illness, it leads to so many difficulties in adult life. So the difference between those two big areas. So I think that's why it's really important, to have those discussions of when might be a time where we have choice or where we need to mask. And that's the other thing too. I think that's so important, is to find people on a campus or people in a work setting or people in the community where you at least know you could be with somebody and be your true self. Because over time, really the idea, it's better to be disliked and be yourself than it is to be loved and have to hide who you are.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of it, because of the mental health and the illnesses and so much other things that come about by losing our core identity to where you don't even know who you are anymore. The other thing too, that the discussion that comes up that's talked about sometimes is that intersectionality. I work with BIPOC communities, and I have a large percentage of my caseload where it would be different for a white 18-year-old male to get pulled over by the police than it would be for one of my Black students who's 18 getting pulled over. So then it becomes, what about the masking piece, or what about the self-advocacy piece? And then that becomes the discussion of disclosure. I'm neurodivergent, I'm autistic, I'm going to keep my hands on the wheel, but I'm not the best in social situations. And then the police officer has the information, says, okay, because that's like a reality. We have to have those discussions, and it's really important where, for safety purposes, there are going to be times where you do have to mask. And that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece to bring up. We talk so much about unmasking and being able to be authentic, but recognizing and just naming the fact that that is a privilege.
Absolutely.
That some people have and others don't.
Yeah. And that discussion does absolutely always has to be at the forefront too. It's an extremely important one.
I mean, I can even think about students, it might be related to law enforcement or those types of things, but it might even just be an unsafe home environment. I mean, that could be a lot of different things.
That's a big one. Unsafe home environment or unsafe settings in certain parts of the school campus or walking home. There's just a variety of situations. And I think that's the value for where I am able to create a situation to have those discussions with my teens that I work with, and create safe environments where those discussions can be held. And then the what to do, like what does the advocacy piece look like, and but then at the same time, tie it into how can we also be our true, authentic, essential selves so we enjoy going to the school campus. It's fortunate for me to be able to be in that setting.
I feel like too often we talk about building the sense of community, building the sense of connection, and focused on our neurodivergent kids, but it really has to be this wider community of students, bringing in the students who are more part of the neuronormative population. They're not neurodivergent, but creating a place where they are also making it okay for neurodivergent kids to show up. Is there anything that you've seen that works in that regard?
On our campus, it's great. So 2 years ago, I advocated for trying to get some additional after-school clubs for everybody. So we would have like the club rush in August, where different leaders on campus are creating a club after school or during lunch where people can connect based on the things that they enjoy. And I said, you know what would be really cool is if we had an anime club and a video game club and a Lego club. So let's seek out and see if we can find some people that are interested and what types of feedback we get. So the video game club has skyrocketed to the point where we're competing against other schools. It's a twice a week thing after school. And neurodivergent students connect with the neuronormative population just naturally. And it's because of that shared interest and so many other variables. I was surprised too with the Lego club because I wasn't sure if I get any responses. And there's now 16 students that do that every other week on a Tuesday, and talk about no pressure to have a conversation or to make eye contact, but just getting in there and having some fun with the things that you love. And that's what it's all about. So to your question on that, after school clubs can be created with that discussion on how those might be effective for each campus. And even during lunch, we have so many just breakout sessions. I open my doors at lunch, and we do a variety of things, such as play video games. But oftentimes it's just more of a, let's come in, let's chill, let's watch a new movie.
Yeah.
That's been really fun too. And it's funny because so many of the holistic crowd and the everybody else trickles in. They don't know me, but I'm like, what's up?
Yeah.
Go find your seat. And then they just all connect.
Yeah. It just normalizes it, which I think is a big part of it. And so I love that idea of having those clubs specific to those special interests that are not isolated to just neurodivergent kids.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just opening the doors makes a big difference.
We also have we do it daily, but we try to incorporate and tie in some concepts campus-wide with our TV video production crew. And we'll have every single day a video bulletin, and it gets emailed out to the teachers and they show it to the class. They're about 10 or 15 minutes long. So that TV video class throughout every day, they create things. So I'll tie in and I'll be the voice of talking about, hey, so some people might have some differences. Here's some ways we can support for all of us. And then I'll throw in my loop ears and be like, I love using these when the crowds are too much and I'm walking upstairs and I feel like the rallies are too much. Or I'll just talk about the things that I like to do, twirling my pen, and I'll just show them I'm constantly stemming or moving my hands. And so if you see other people doing it, just know that it's their way to stay focused and relieve stress. And little tips and ideas so it normalizes the whole campus, and everyone's like, hey, cool, you want to bring your plushie? We actually do that, by the way. We'll do a pajama day. Yeah. We'll do a plushie day. And I'm on a campus of 3,300 students. So when you have 800 students walking around with a plushie, talk about normalizing it. It's pretty cool. You could just be yourself. I'm fortunate too, because I live in a land where that is more of the norm, acceptance. And especially where I live right on the border of Venice Beach. And I don't know if you've ever been in Venice Beach, but it's really cool because legitimately you could be who you want and no one's going to bat an eye. They're like, cool. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about this assessment piece that you've created. And I'm going to say the acronym. Is it the DASSLE? Am I saying it correctly?
You got it, the DASSLE.
So tell us a little bit about that. What does DASSLE stand for and what makes this different?
Yeah, so it stands for the Dynamic Assessment of Social Emotional Learning. I created this several years ago, and it just continues to grow, and I update it. And it came based on the foundation that every single form, whether it was the social responsiveness scale or the ASDS, that was a checklist for families and things that the psychologist would send, or on my end of things, there's pragmatic profiles. All of that was based on norming them with the non-autistic population. So what ended up happening, and it's been happening since 1953 when the DSM came out, which was let's try to figure out how people are different and call it wrong and try to fix people. And it's done nothing but help. So that's current day what we have that the school psychologists, speech pathologists have on assessing pragmatics and social language is when it comes to standardizing, that's what standardized means. Taking a group of people and making it norm referenced and trying to push everybody in this box. And what that does, if you have results from those tests, it gets put into your reports. And then from the reports, it gets put into your present levels of the IEP, which pushes the goals. So if you don't have the right data to begin with, then all it's going to do is create a rippling effect. And the reality is nobody benefits from that. And you have language where the parents feel like their child is broken and that's the language that's used. So I'll give you some examples. If you have a checklist on the standardized forms, sometimes you'll hear things in an IEP or in a report that will say, and I'll just use my name. Chris tends to perseverate on Minecraft and only talks about his area of interest. He does not connect with his peers and lacks eye contact and tends to move too much in class, which is disruptive. He doesn't have adequate behaviors or he has unexpected behaviors, and he needs to learn how to engage with reciprocal back and forth conversation, make eye contact, stay seated. So that's sometimes what we'll see as a present levels because of the way the language was written. So the DASL comes in and says, how can we form questions and checklists to come at it from a strengths-based approach while understanding autistic neurology, understanding differences, as well as providing the supports so the students can thrive on campus. So questions would be sent to the family at home forms, and the questions on that are going to talk about what works best for your student, what helps them stay regulated. When they're upset, who do they go to get some support? So we're targeting co-regulation, we're targeting self-regulation, we're targeting emotional needs, we're targeting sensory differences, we're targeting self-advocacy, and really building it from a foundation where the parents are like, oh, so this is what's working. Here's what I'd like to prioritize. These are the things that I think would work best. And then we take that information. The teachers have forms that have questions that are getting real-time data that help us form our IEP goals. So for example, if the student isn't clear on an activity or instructions, what is their way of reaching out to get clarity? Or are they asking for help? Or do they have an alternative way of communicating to you that might not be verbal, but maybe they're emailing or writing it down? Does the student seem to require some movement breaks or need some support with any kind of sensory? So we're really getting the data that can support who they are. And then from there, we can create goals. And those goals might target perspective taking or how to find a safe person in the building or how to advocate for in conversation clarification. So it might be, a student might struggle with indirect language because they might be more of a direct communicator, bottom-up processor. Mm-hmm. So the goal might be them being on the phone saying, I don't always pick up on sarcasm or indirect language. So if you could just, speak directly to me, that would make this conversation easy. Or just building the skills where it works for them so they don't have to stress out or they don't have to feel like they are removing themselves from a situation. And so that's kind of the foundation of it. The nice thing about the DASL too is that based on the variety of forms, there's a goal bank, and the goal bank has about 50 goals in it that target the most important areas. We're talking about self-advocacy, emotional regulation, and support. We're talking about sensory, perspective taking, problem solving, just the areas that can best and most effectively help our students. There's no ableist goals. There's no compliance goals. There's no performance goals. There's none of that. So it's flipping the narrative. And it's been great because I can update it as much as I get my new information that I learn along the way.
I really appreciate that because I think having a way to reframe what we're doing as educators when we're writing those goals, when we are thinking about, the observations that we're making and how we're considering what that really means, it goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the conversation between that compliance-based versus communication or contextual understanding of things. And as a mental health clinician, one of the things that comes up in therapy often is about reframing thoughts. And this is kind of based in cognitive behavioral therapy, take it or leave it. But for the purposes of this conversation, there's some use to recognizing the fact that the language that we use and the things that we think influence how we feel about things, how we view them. And so when we are using that deficit-based language to write up an IEP, to write those accommodations, it's a much different outlook and way that we're thinking about what those next steps are, as opposed to looking at those strengths and the things that are going well and moving away from the compliance-based goals in really honoring that authenticity.
And there's actually research that shows that the difference in the language in these reports can impact the parent and child relationship. So if you're getting a report that's deficit-based and all you're hearing is that your child is in the far below average range and they're severe and they're whatever it might be, it generates those thoughts like you're talking about. And it can, so that's why this is so critical. And everybody benefits too when you can tie in what the students can do and what works for them and what keeps them regulated and what helps them thrive and what helps them give the tools in all environments. Because, these create a healthy skill set beyond the school walls and post-high school. And that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're working with your neurodivergent students and they're having a tough time with all of the expectations that they have trying to fit into a world that wasn't created for them, what is it that you tell them?
I try to veer away from the everything's going to be all right, just go do this, just go do that. And I just sit back and I become I become all ears. I don't say much. I'm just there to offer support. I'm there to talk about and validate those experiences. And then from there, I try to be creative and figure out what are my next steps, whatever those might look like. Is it the school campus? Is it one class? Is it one setting? What can I do to come at it for creating the best approach to help this student so we can get them out of rumination on thinking about those types of things and then what works for them. I think too, sometimes there's this thought where it's like, okay, so why don't we just, if they're sad because they're not connecting with peers, then let's create goals to make them go meet peers and initiate conversations. And then honestly, I know I've said this several times, but like diving into those special interests, there's beauty in that people don't realize. And I learned so much about so many random things. I'm just like a walking Wikipedia about things that I never thought I was going to learn about.
Information I have in my head about Pokemon is unreal.
I got information about like how trees communicate with each other.
Yeah, the favorite special interest that I had from a client, and we would talk about it every time. This was a while ago. It's dated, so you can see, but she was super into Justin Bieber, and she told me all of the things about Justin Bieber. She was a middle school student, and that was what all of the middle school girls were talking about. And so she was able to use that as a way to build that connection. And I think that was just one of those instances where that really worked out for her, but it shows how much having that connection and those shared interests can facilitate those relationships.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Before we wrap it up, I got a 35-second story. I was up at this place called the Underwood Farms up in the Valley, just outside of LA. And I was with my family, with Jesse and my children. And sure enough, in the chicken coop, it was Justin Bieber and Haley, just them two. It was a Wednesday in the summer and there's no one around. And I went, no way. This is crazy. Had his shirt off. It was kind of desolate. There's not a lot of people around. So I had my 3-year-old at the time, he was 3, and he had a Dodgers hat on. His name's Jack. And I was like, you know what? There's never going to be another opportunity. So I walk over, I'm all, hey man, this is going to sound a little wild, but my son Jack was born March 1st, and I know that's your birthday. And he laughed. He's like, how did you know that was my birthday? I'm like, because I was in the hospital and I Googled what celebrities were born on March 1st. And he's like, I love the name. My dad's middle name's Jack. My grandfather's name's Jack. And I said, you know what? The best thing ever was, because my dad passed away of a heart attack years ago, and I named him after my dad. I said, the best thing for me is seeing forms with my dad's name on it. It's my son. A year later, Justin and Haley had a baby, and they named their son Jack. I had influence in Justin Bieber's and Haley. I'm not even kidding. So I have pictures with Justin. I posted it online and I was like, I had influence. So there's my Justin Bieber celeb story.
What a great story. So Chris Wenger, also known as Speech Dude, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Emily, that's just how we change the world.
We talk a lot about helping students succeed, but real success isn't just about mastering skills or meeting expectations. It's about being able to show up as yourself without apology. Authenticity shouldn't be something that students have to set aside in order to survive school. It should be something we actively protect and nurture. Chris's work is a reminder that when we prioritize authentic communication, affirm strengths, and offer support without hidden expectations, we're not just helping students navigate the system, we're helping them stay connected to who they are. And in the long run, that's what leads to true growth, true learning, and true belonging. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Thanks again to Chris Wenger. We have links to his work in the show notes. Also, through the end of the week, we've opened the Neurodiversity University Therapist Hub so you can get involved. It's a really strange time right now, and I'm not sure any of us know where things are going. And the only thing we can do that makes any sense, I think, is to lean on each other and work our way through it together. And that's what the Therapist Hub is all about. And also, if as a mental health professional you need continuing education, you can find it in the Hub. Like I said, the window is open now, and it's very affordable. And it's nice to be among friends. There's a link in the show notes to join us. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Corey Orrick is our office manager and production assistant. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.